Hi there, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Wednesday. Tonight, Pablo Rodriguez is out as Quebec Liberal leader. Embroiled in party turmoil, former federal cabinet minister Pablo Rodriguez steps down as Quebec Liberal leader just 6 months after taking the helm of the party. What went wrong, and what could it mean for national unity? Tom Mulcair and La Presse's JD Belvance will be here in moments to talk about that. Then, premiers and the Prime Minister set to meet.
The Prime Minister is doing a great job talking to other leaders around the world, making deals with other leaders. So that's what Ontario is going to focus on.
Prime Minister Mark Carney will convene a First Ministers meeting tomorrow. It's the first one since he signed a memorandum of understanding with Alberta, which of course saw sharp pushback from British Columbia. What are the political stakes of tomorrow's sit-down? Our front bench with Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky will be here to talk about that coming up. Plus, unpacking the wild world of political polling in 2025. What's the public opinion story of the last year? If an election were to be held tomorrow, what's the top issue for voters? Abacus Data's David Coletto and Leger's Sebastian Dallaire will break down their numbers coming up a little bit later on the show. First, though, we're going to start tonight with some significant developing news out of the province of Quebec. Pablo Rodriguez is out as Quebec's Liberal leader after weeks of turmoil engulfing both his leadership and the party. Rodriguez told his caucus colleagues he would step down just this afternoon following a series of controversies, including the suspension of the party's former parliamentary leader who fired her chief of staff without consulting Rodriguez, the dismissal of another member of his caucus because of an investigation by Quebec's ethics commissioner, and an alleged cash for votes scheme in his leadership campaign that anti-corruption police are investigating. For his part, Rodriguez has consistently denied any wrongdoing, insisting previously he has nothing to hide.
You're basically pushing like your party on the side of the highway.
No.
Yes, you are. It's a
6 months.
It's a UBAC's investigation.
6 months ago, I was elected by the members because I know how to win. I have nothing to hide. I'm fully transparent, and I don't accept that my party is attacked like this. For us, it's important that we get the truth and all the truth. And if people did anything wrong, then they'll pay the price.
Pablo Rodriguez, a former federal cabinet minister under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, became Liberal leader just last June. He cast his party as the only viable alternative to the Souverainist Parti Québécois and a way to avoid a third referendum on independence. So who might replace him? Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne was asked right away by reporters if he plans to run for the leadership. Here's what he said.
Do you have any plans to maybe take over his role and save the country from a referendum?
No. I think that my way of serving Quebec and Quebecers has been to bring my voice to Ottawa. And I think as Minister of Finance, you would appreciate that I have a lot of things on my plate to make sure that we succeed. We build the strongest economy in the G7. And it's my way to contribute to our democracy and to also represent the people from Quebec.
So where does that leave things ahead of next year's provincial election and on the question of another referendum? Now, Tom Mulcair is a CTV political analyst and former NDP leader. He was also a former Quebec Liberal provincial minister and member of the National Assembly. And Joël Denis Belvance is the Ottawa bureau chief of La Presse. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for the conversation. What a significant day in Quebec, JD. I'll start with you. Was there any other option for Pablo Rodriguez other than this one?
No, that was the only option he had left because he was losing the support of his caucus. And his caucus, which he met today, was going to ask him to resign. So when you've got no support, and also his two opponents in the leadership race that he won were also asking him to leave. And the powerful young Liberal Commission refused to sign a letter of support to him, and that's a major one. They have about a third of the voting bloc when the convention meet of the Quebec Liberal Party. So Mr. Pablo Rodriguez was looking left and right for support, and he had none.
What are your thoughts, Tom, on sort of the way that this point has been arrived at, and how short a time, basically since the beginning of November, just over a month, it took to totally dismantle Rodriguez's leadership?
Yeah, but it's been front page news in Quebec over and over again. But it's one of those cases that I live sometimes where something is big here in my home province and doesn't carry it at all outside. Yes, there are the aspects that Joël Denis just described. I mean, it's scandalous. There's allegations of vote buying. There are investigations by the Specialized Anti-Corruption Police Force. The Ethics Commissioner at the National Assembly is investigating his leadership race. There are 4 different investigations going on, and they kept denying. But yesterday, the ultimate one was, we found out that there was a fundraising dinner. A lot of people who worked for the person who organized it were told, give $500, and they would say, well, I don't have $500 to give. And they said, no, you give your check for $500, that'll be okay, and then we'll give you back $500 cash. So there were dozens of envelopes apparently floating around that night as people were being reimbursed. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It became, as Joël Denis just said, absolutely untenable for him to stay there. Now, before any of that happened, you mentioned it in the outset, Vashi, a woman named Marois Risky, a member of the Quebec National Assembly, highly regarded. Everyone who knows her will tell you a very straight shooter. She and Rodriguez at least agreed on this, that there were shenanigans. They used the French word, which is actually a bit of a borrow from English, of les fling-flang, basically saying, okay, there was some stuff that was simply not kosher around his leadership campaign. He didn't try to deny it, but he said he had nothing to do with it, which became his excuse all the way through. And then when she, Marois Risky, this member of the Quebec National Assembly, fired the chief of staff who had been imposed on her by Rodriguez because she connected the two and realized that she had to have a clean break from them, Rodriguez, incredibly, in showing total lack of leadership, simply decided he was going to throw her out of her job as parliamentary leader, because of course he's not elected, so it required the best person they had to stand up in the House and do question period with the premier and so forth. And then once she was out of the caucus, he didn't even bring back the other person who had been chief of staff. So it was an absolute mess ethically. In terms of integrity, it's something that will stain the Liberals, who had done everything they can to break from the previous era where they were identified with that sort of stuff. So a lot of people are trying to say now, well, the last thing we need is to have, to be more closely tied with the feds, because this is what Rodriguez brought with him, this type of behavior. And it's really going to hurt the Liberals' chances at a time when the Parti Québécois, the separatists, are threatening to have another referendum on sovereignty. Yeah. The last thing we need is that. And the Liberals really had a strong chance. Legault's not popular at all, but a lot of people are parking their vote with the separatists, saying it's the only way to get rid of Legault, but the Liberals could have pulled it off if they had a decent leader. We'll see what the very snap leadership race, it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks, but the Liberals federally did that and came up with a certain Mark Carney and did pretty well in the election. So maybe they've got a bit of a chance.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, sort of, for people who are not as familiar with the political situation in the province, JD, where the Liberals sit relative to the PQ and how much of a challenge, regardless of who takes over, they have ahead of them, in your view, ahead of that election next fall.
Well, the latest poll that I've seen from Léger put the Parti Québécois at 39%, but very high among Francophone voters, and where that's, brings a lot of ridings and seats, obviously. And the Liberals had fell because of the corruption allegations, 6 points in 1 month, and they were like 21%. So they were far away, and especially so among Francophone voters. Now, as Thomas Mortier just mentioned, will they be able to pull a Mark Carney miracle? That's what they'll be looking for, because it's going to be a very quick leadership race, 4 to 6 weeks. And so who's going to be able to put together a leadership race, plead with Quebecers that the Liberal Party of Quebec has changed and that they will put enough distance between themselves and Pablo Rodriguez and what happened before the next provincial elections. And this, I think, the rest of Canada need to pay attention to that because of the promise to hold a third referendum on sovereignty. And Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, despite the fact that polls after polls show Quebecers have no appetite for a third consultation on separation, he wants to go ahead still. So next year, if the election is held as we expected in October, the Parti Québécois wins that mandate, they will go forward with their referendum. So that means that Ottawa will have to deal with, in Washington, Donald Trump and the war and the trade war, and in Quebec on the union front, a possible referendum on nationality. So it's a
big deal.
It's a big deal. So I'm sure that some people in Ottawa right now are nervous about what's happening in Quebec.
Help us understand, Tom, how that juxtaposition that JD just described, that Poll after poll since the threat of Donald Trump has showed the separatist sentiment in Quebec among the population is decreasing. But
Right.
the PQ has a lot of momentum and is polling very high at the same time while promising a referendum on the issue. How can we reconcile those two things?
It's the same type of house of cards that Pierre Poilievre presided over when he was 28 points ahead of the Liberals, because Justin Trudeau was a very unpopular leader and people were saying, I'm going to vote Conservative. They were parking their voting intentions there. So too with the Parti Québécois, because as you correctly say, 65% of Quebecers want nothing to do with a referendum, much less to do with separation, pure and simple. But we could be projected into that because there are so many opposition parties in Quebec. Joël Denis described the high 30s right now for the Parti Québécois, but the Libs are tumbling and they don't get any seats in the Quebec heartland, the rural areas. They get a lot of seats in Montreal. That's why they're still the official opposition. The Quebec Conservatives are resurgent in the polls because they're stealing votes away from the governing CAQ party of François Legault. And of course, there's the Quebec quasi NDP. It's called Quebec Solidaire, Quebec Solidarity, and it used to be in the 15% range. Now, a little bit like the NDP, it's back down to single digits. So right now, if there was an election tomorrow, given how weak the Liberals are, the Parti Québécois would probably win it. But a lot of those parked votes could easily be drawn back to the Liberals, and we could avoid the referendum, and we could avoid the threat of separation again, because it's a little bit different from Alberta. Here it's structured, and it's a party, and it's got money, and they're going for it. That could all be avoided if somehow the Liberals could get their act together.
On that note, final question for you, JD, because we heard Minister Champagne, federal finance minister Champagne there say, no, I'm not thinking about it. Do you think that there's a chance he could be swayed? And who else do you have your eye on as a replacement?
Well, Mélanie Joly, the industry minister, was approached. She said no, she has no intention of jumping into the provincial scene. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is some pressure put on François-Philippe Champagne, the finance minister, to change his mind. We've seen that movie in the past. Quebecing was putting a lot of pressure on Jean Charest, who was then leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in 1997. He didn't want to go to Quebec City. He wanted to be a federal prime minister. Same situation, Mr. Champagne. He aspires to be one day maybe Prime Minister of Canada. But if Quebecing pleads with him, you're the only one who can save us from a third referendum, the pressure might be so immense that over the next few days he might have to change his mind. But we'll see. Other than that, there's the two candidates who lost to Mr. Pablo Rodriguez. Carl Blackburn, he's a former Conseil du Patronat president and also a Liberal operative. And Charles Millard, former chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in Quebec. He was from the business community. Those two, but they are not well known to Quebecers. So that, leaves a kind of a void. So we'll see what happens. But clearly, they're looking for a Captain Canada to save the Quebec Liberal Party.
And fast. Thanks. Yes. Thanks so much to both of you. I appreciate your analysis, as always, JD Belvance and Tom Mulcair. Our front bench will be here shortly to share their reaction to the resignation of Pablo Rodriguez, from the helm, I should say, of the Quebec Liberal Party. Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky will be here in moments. Turning, though, first to some other significant news. Canada has just logged its biggest population drop on record. Statistics Canada is estimating this country's population fell by roughly 76,000 people between July and October. That's the biggest decline Canada has seen based on historical records dating all the way back to the 1940s. The main factor was a sharp reduction in immigration, non-permanent residents to be exact, whose numbers fell by more than 176,000. Coming up tonight on Power Play, Prime Minister Carney is set to convene a virtual First Ministers meeting tomorrow with international trade and the domestic economy high on the agenda. Our front bench is with us in just a few moments to break all of that down. Stay tuned.
It's an exciting time at the EB House. We're 8 days till Christmas, and the kids have all these ideas about really expensive and practical gifts that are just never going to happen. But they've been watching the news, and they think they have a loophole. They've suggested that they enter into an MOU with Santa to be able to achieve what they're hoping for.
Christmas is a little over a week away, and premiers will be heading into a virtual sit-down with the Prime Minister to talk about their wish list tomorrow. This first ministers' meeting will be the first since Alberta and Ottawa signed a memorandum of understanding, which sets out conditions for a new bitumen pipeline from Alberta to British Columbia's coast. That agreement, though, has drawn sharp criticism from BC's Premier David Eby, as he just implied in that clip. The Prime Minister's office tells CTV News topics for tomorrow's meeting include international trade and, quote, growing a stronger domestic economy. So what can we expect politically to come out of tomorrow's meeting? Let's bring in our front bench. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst. She's the former Deputy Chief of Staff as well to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Next to her, that's Sebastian Skamsky. He was former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Laura D'Angelo here in studio is with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. And Jamie Allerton is the principal at Kanaptis and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Hi, everybody. Happy almost a week to Christmas. Jamie, I'll start with you. I actually just wanted to get a quick reaction from you guys to the news out of Quebec. From a national perspective about Pablo Rodriguez having to exit stage left, your quick thought on sort of the potential national significance of that.
Yeah, I think it was a surprise. When this story first broke, it seemed like it was going to be kind of like some people far from the leader did something during a leadership race and it ultimately wasn't going to have legs. But that turned out not to be the case. So I think the national implications are is it puts the sovereignty question whether or not there will be a referendum and what that looks like for the rest of broader Canada, potentially back on the table in 2026.
Yeah, we've been really focused, Sharon, on the potential for Alberta separatism. But this almost seems as live, if not more alive, of an issue given the events of the last 24 hours.
Yeah, definitely. What's happening in Quebec has not gotten many people's attention, and I think it does require more. Now, what's happening within the Quebec Liberal Party, I think, is it was unsustainable for Mr. Rodriguez to stay, given what has been taking place over the last several weeks. But there's a bigger discussion around what a potential Quebec election can look like and what that means for Quebec's own sovereignty. And there's a big separatist movement that people are not really talking about too candidly across Canada, which I think deserves a bit more attention.
Well, I mean, if that election were held tomorrow, Sebastian, the PQ would win, and the leader of the PQ, who would become premier, has said he will hold a referendum.
Scary times, but move over, baby Jesus. We have a miracle for the holiday season. A Liberal has finally taken accountability for their own corruption. What a refreshing thing to see in this country. Mr. Rodriguez, who was a prominent cabinet minister in Justin Trudeau's government for the last 10 years and a keen supporter of the new Liberal government as well. Many of his colleagues remain in that cabinet and in that Liberal caucus federally. It is refreshing to see that accountability is front and center. It's unfortunate that it has taken this long and for it to be entirely unrelated to his work on the federal side to result in this. But I hope more Liberals take notice and take notes from Mr. Rodriguez and look within themselves to take account for their own corruption.
You know what I didn't have on my 2025 bingo card, Laura, was the sentence "move over, baby Jesus" being spoken on this program. So, Sebastian, I have you to thank for that. Your quick thought, Laura, your reaction to the significance of this.
I mean, I think this is massive. Sharon is right that it hasn't gotten a lot of national attention, and it should, right? There's been some rhetoric today around, well, we know there's people in the federal government and on the federal scene starting to plan for if the PQ are going to make a move towards actually having another referendum on separating. And I think that minimizes how hard it was last time, how big of a deal it was. It was 49 to 51%. So the Quebec Liberals losing their leader and being thrown into chaos, and frankly, the PQ benefiting from that should be something that all Canadians are taking very seriously.
Okay, let's switch gears, moving on from this specific provincial issue to a wider series of them, Jamie, and this meeting that's going to take place. I think the most interesting part of it right now is that it's the first one since all heck broke loose between Alberta's premier and BC's premier post-signing of the MOU. How do you expect that dynamic to play out in this meeting?
So, spoiler alert, I'm not expecting too many fireworks tomorrow. I think even when you listen to how the Prime Minister's office is talking about this meeting is being virtual. No one's really coming into Ottawa except for, I think, Doug Ford, who's heading up the 401 to join them in person. This is essentially just going to be designed to generate some national news stories that the premiers and the Prime Minister are working together and focusing on trade. And like the fact that they are meeting is the story. I don't expect deliverables otherwise really coming out of this.
Sharon, what do you think about that?
I think Jamie's partially right there. I don't think there's going to be any big takeaways beyond this being a touch point. We know Prime Minister Carney's style is very different than how previous prime ministers have done first ministers meetings, but this is a touch point. This is an opportunity to kind of get together and have an end of year discussion. We know there's going to be some heated thoughts between Premier Eby, Premier Smith, and this MOU that there seems to be a disconnect around with BC and Alberta, but I don't sense that there's going to be anything crazy coming out of it. But I do think it's important to have this touch point because we still are in a trade war with the U.S. Provinces are still being impacted, and I think having a moment to come together to talk about priorities going into the new year is important.
So I take all of that. I guess for me, what I'm thinking, and I'll give credit to one of Laura and I, my co-panelists on radio, Jeff Rutledge this morning, Sebastian, who pointed out, like, the issue of the pipeline may also be sort of navigated through the premiers. And by that, I interpret, and I think it's a good point, like, there are a lot of other premiers who support Premier Smith's position in this instance. The new Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, the premiers of the territories want more oil and gas exploration. Like, should the pipeline issue not come up? Like, shouldn't it come up, given how big of a deal it was just a few weeks ago?
Well, I hope it does come up, and Vashi, I think I'll preface anything I'll say by saying you obviously know my view and position on having yet another meeting to have another conversation. It's a lot more inaction on the part of Prime Minister Carney. I think what I'd say to that, as I would say in the case of every other major project that has been put forward, is that Prime Minister Carney actually has the ability to do this stuff on his own. He has the ability to push forward with these projects. It is under his jurisdiction. Premier Eby may have some thoughts and reflections and a great sense of humor, as we saw in the clip that you showed off the top, about the MOU and about what he thinks about Premier Smith. But the reality is that it is just under Prime Minister Carney's control to actually move forward with these. So I hope tomorrow is less about the talking and more about the doing.
I think it will, to some extent, though, be about the talking, given that it is the first, and not to say like one is right or the other is, but like it's the first time that they've all gotten together since what is, I think, a significant development in federal-provincial relations. To, on a positive note for Alberta, and BC's interpreting it very differently. What are your thoughts, Laura, about how that might play out?
I do think it's going to be about the talking, and that's not always a bad thing, right? Like, sometimes it's a good thing for the premiers to be allowed to come around the table and air their grievances. I think the big question is, how is the MOU brought up? Is it proactively by the Prime Minister? Is it by Premier Eby, Premier Smith? I think that it would be very strange if the MOU isn't discussed, whether by one of those other premiers who have, frankly, pretty invested interest in it moving forward, in a way where it's, why can't we get an MOU on something else that we've been working on, right? Or because Premier Eby wants to talk about how problematic this is to him. And so, I agree with Jamie and Sharon. I don't think there's going to be any big, sexy press conference coming out of this that has a great announcement in it. But I do think there's going to be, I think we're going to get a sense coming out of it of how premiers are starting to feel around that table and if the cracks are really starting to show or if that's just public.
Okay, I'm going to leave this part of our discussion there. We're going to take a quick break. The front bench is sticking around. We've asked them to select their picks for the biggest story of the year. And then I'm going to ask them what the biggest challenges their own parties could face in 2026 are. All of them. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay right there.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never.
Look, this has got to be the biggest political gathering of the 21st century.
Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada.
Who cares? I mean, it's a detail. It's a detail. I spoke to him. I'll speak to him again when it matters.
That was a good montage, a taste of some of the top political stories of this past year, from a federal election to a trade war with Canada's neighbor and closest ally. What will the biggest challenges be for political parties as they navigate 2026? For a look back at 2025 and a look ahead to next year, we're going to bring back the front bench: Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skanski. I'll start on a round of what your pick for the biggest story of the year is, and Laura, I'll give the floor to you first. What was it? I have 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. Yeah.
My pick for biggest story of the year is Liberals forming another government. I think this day last year, I was sitting in this chair and we were speculating on how soon it would be before the Liberal government fell. Like, that was the whole deal. And now we're sitting here with another Liberal prime minister, a very close to a Liberal majority, and a government that's governing as if they already have it, doing really big things, and frankly, changing the entire face of the Liberal Party.
Sebastian, what's the big story from where you sit?
Who cares, Vashi? Who cares? Clearly not Prime Minister Carney. And I think that clip obviously was in reference to trade negotiations with President Trump, which I'll remind your viewers, again for the dozenth time, have not come to fruition as Mr. Carney has promised. But who cares really applies to the entire mantra of this Liberal government. Who cares? Who cares about the unemployment rate? Who cares about the fact that more Canadians are going hungry? Who cares about the fact that crime continues to be rampant? Who cares about the fact that the immigration system remains broken and abused? I think that phrase really encapsulates Prime Minister Carney's vision, unfortunately, for this country, to the detriment of Canadians. And I think he's going to pay down the road a very big price for that kind of approach, that kind of attitude, and for those words specifically.
Sharon, your big story?
Well, my biggest story of the year would be who was the biggest loser. And I got to say, if losing was an Olympic sport, Pierre Poilievre would be going for the gold. We have a man who has been elected since he was 25 years old, I believe, has been in office now for just over 2 decades, lost his own seat, had to go run in another province, in another seat, had to have a member step down, has now had 2 members of the Conservative Party cross the floor, 1 has resigned, and just can't seem to catch a break because he can't seem to change his style. So I would say the biggest story last year around this time, people were getting, like, they were measuring the curtains. They were trying to see where he's going to put his desk. And right now, it's not looking so good for Pierre Poilievre.
Don't the 2 of you fight each other after this segment is over, is all I have to say. Jamie, what's the big story from where you sit?
I think the biggest story of the year was actually Prime Minister Carney recreating the Liberal voter coalition. I think Sharon's got it wrong in the sense that Jagmeet Singh and the obliteration of the NDP actually counts for the actual biggest loser. Not only did they lose a seat, they lost party status, and they lost way more seats. And so I think when you look at the shifting reality of the Liberal voter coalition right now, I think it remains to be seen how permanent this relationship is going to be. I don't just think it was a result of subsuming the left flank with the NDP and the progressive vote. But there are a lot of more economic centrist swing voters who decidedly went Mark Carney, and it's frankly propelled him into government. And so I think that's the big one to watch. We'll see where that's going to go. There's obviously division in Liberal ranks. We saw that with Minister Guilbeault resigning from cabinet. But I think lesson for Conservatives in this one is we spent a decade essentially mocking Justin Trudeau and thinking, laughing he was an idiot and assuming everyone else to agree, and eventually he'd defeat himself. And he won 3 elections. And taking the same approach to Mark Carney is probably going to yield the same result.
The real question I have for everyone is, like, who is next year's Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry? No, I'm joking. I will instead ask you to look ahead. My sarcasm doesn't translate. I will ask you to look ahead,
left shark,
Laura.
but left bottom flank of the screen there.
Yeah, exactly. How, like, in your view, and Jamie sort of alluded to this, but There is the possibility of an election next year. I think it's a very real possibility. Yes, they may get a majority through additional floor crossers, but it won't be a resounding majority unless they head back to the polls, and that ends up being the outcome. In your view, after this very successful year for your party relative to the year before, what is the big challenge ahead?
Everything Mark Carney has done so far, particularly this fall, but over the past few months, has been really long term. They are big things that Canadians probably won't see the result of or feel the impact of for at least 5 years, but probably longer, right? When we think about housing, reducing the immigration numbers, those impacts on housing are going to take a long time. Same with a pipeline. A lot of these MPO projects, these are big things that take time. And so I actually think Mark Carney's biggest challenge coming up is how are they going to pivot back to what I do think Pierre Poilievre has identified as the biggest issue for Canadians, to affordability. How are they going to tie these things together and connect with Canadians in 6 months when things are moving and trucking along, but Canadians are still having really major affordability concerns?
Sebastian, what do you think the biggest challenge ahead for the Conservatives is?
For sure, and I don't want to seem like I'm stealing ideas off of Laura, but I think the point I wanted to make is Mr. Poilievre will really have to, and the entirety of the Conservative caucus will have to make the case to Canadians that the ills that this country is facing and that the suffering that Canadians are being subjected to are directly tied to the decisions being made by that Liberal government. And Mr. Carney, frankly, is a bit of a costly chameleon. He's able to take on many shapes and forms and say one thing out of one side of his mouth and do a completely separate other thing that is contradictory to what he has been saying. We've seen that throughout his entire political career and even prior, before his political aspirations kind of were formalized. And so I think Mr. Poilievre, the Conservative team, who have been doing a great job at showing what they would be doing and providing hope in the solutions that they're putting forward, they have to very effectively tie Mr. Carney together to those shortcomings that Canadians are experiencing.
This exercise, I will say, was meant to be what is the challenge your party faces? I feel like that was one of those, to both of you to an extent, what's your biggest challenge when you apply for a job? I just work too hard. It's just too difficult. Sharon, come on, Sharon. I'm depending on you here. Be real. What's the biggest challenge the Liberals face next year?
So I would say the biggest challenge the Liberals and Prime Minister Carney are going to face is speed. We know the Prime Minister wants to get stuff done. He is not one to kind of sit back and just let the bureaucracy kind of slow roll things. And we're working within a system that is quite slow. Anyone who's tried to get stuff done within any level of government is kind of, it takes time, it takes years, and that's not how Prime Minister Carney is operating. So I think for him, his caucus, his cabinet, the biggest challenge is going to be, we've got these visions, generational visions of things we want to do, build things, homes, all of these projects. How do we get them done quicker? How do we do them in partnership? And I think that's going to be a shift and a challenge for him. I know there's a lot of ministers out there, like Minister Hodgson, who has been a pivotal part of this caucus in trying to get things done. And these are people who come from the business community who don't suffer fools when things take forever. So I think the biggest challenge is going to be speed for them.
I feel like that's another, we're amazing, but something else might get in the way. Thank you for your attempt. It doesn't, I don't know. If it, yeah, did you really? Jamie, come on, do something, pull it up for me here. What is the big, please be up front. What is the biggest challenge the Conservatives will face next year?
Yeah, so I actually think the biggest challenge for the Conservatives is to take their potential voter pool and grow that number. Conservatives typically have a much smaller voter pool than what the Liberal Party enjoys. And so long as the Liberals are going to be consolidating that left flank, the Conservatives are going to need to grow. And they're going to have to do it one of two ways. You've already seen Pierre Poilievre have some success reach out to people who are not typically voting in the past, so bringing new voters online and getting him to support them, keeping their support and providing that message of hope on affordability and the struggles, I think is going to be a key part of that. But the other is for swing voters in places like Toronto and Vancouver who voted Stephen Harper in 2011 and maybe even again in 2015, but didn't vote for Conservatives last time. They voted for Mark Carney because they trusted him on the question of Donald Trump and the economy. Pierre is going to need to shore that up and close that gap if he's going to be able to get over the hump next time. And I think that's the Conservative Party's biggest challenge in 2026.
Do you think, Laura, there's going to be an election next year? And do you think your party wants there to be one?
Oh, I don't think the party wants there to be an election. I think that they probably stand to benefit the most from an election. I think they probably care the least if there's an election. Do I think there will be one? I think that's a big if, depending on this potential floor crosser.
Sebastian, do you think there's going to be an election, and would the Conservatives want one?
Vashti, I'm not a betting man, so I won't take the bait on that. It's very hard to say. I think anyone who claims that they know ahead of time is probably a kind of over-exaggerating their crystal ball. I think whatever the case may be, I think what we've seen is, despite the media and some, titans of thought on Twitter and in the pages of some newspapers saying about troubles on the part of the Conservative Party, I think we have seen under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre an incredibly competitive party, a party that currently, if there was an election to be held, would be neck and neck, and some projections are even showing an increase in seats beyond what the Liberals hold right now. So I think the Conservative Party and Mr. Poilievre will be ready no matter the case, and they're going to deliver that message of hope to Canadians.
Do you think the Liberals want an election, Sharon?
I think it's very dependent. If there's a couple more floor crossers, probably not. But if the polls and the public perception and buy-in is there, they'll probably want one, because who doesn't want to solidify a bigger majority or a potential bigger majority? So I think it's very likely there will be one, but it's all very dependent on how Pierre Poilievre's leadership review goes, and I know people are of the view that he's going to pass right through that, but I'm looking left, right, and center, and I'm seeing the shanks coming out, so I think anything is possible, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was one next year.
Last word to you on that, Jamie.
I think if this stays a minority parliament, I think there's definitely a real shot of an election in 2026. I think the reality is, if there are additional floor crossers or anything that puts more Liberals and gets them over that majority number, then the pressure is really actually on Mark Carney to deliver. And he'll have no excuse because he'll have the mandate. And so does he really want to govern with like a 1 or 2 seat majority where like the whip miscounting one day actually still sends us to the polls anyways? And I think he kind of gives away some of his political upside and advantage if that's the case.
I'll leave it on that note. My own titans of thought in the front bench. Thank you, all of you, for such great analysis this year. And I wish you all Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, the best of the holiday season. Thanks for everything. Laura D'Angelo, Sharon Carr, Sebastian Skamsky, and Jamie Ellerton, our front bench. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to unpack, as you just heard, a number of our panelists talk about political polling. That polling with David Coletto from Abacus Data and Sebastian Dallaire from Leger. Next, stay right there. Welcome back to Power Play. You just heard from our front bench about their top picks for the story of the year, the political story of the year. Can pollsters quantify what they qualified? All right, let's bring in David Coletto. He's the founder and CEO of Abacus Data, and Sebastian Dallaire is an executive vice president at Leger for Eastern Canada. Hi to both of you. Holiday greetings, and thank you very much for making time for the conversation. I'll start off. We were just talking with our other panel about the biggest stories of the year. From a public opinion polling perspective, David, I'll start with you. What is the story of the year?
Well, I think Sebastian and I are going to agree. It was the massive swing in support to the Liberal Party, soon after the Liberal leadership race began, where I don't think I've seen, a 20-point swing in popular support for a government that, in a party we had all but written off just a few weeks earlier. So I think that's the biggest story, is how fast Canadians' views towards the Liberal Party and to their, comfort with re-electing that party after almost a decade in office.
You both have been doing this for a long time, Sebastian. Had you ever seen anything like it?
In Quebec, yes.
In Quebec, valid point.
Nationally, no, but it reminded me in many ways of what we saw in Quebec in 2011 when we had the Orange Crush, where Jack Layton and the NDP came out of nowhere to go from 1 seat in the province to 49. And the 1 seat was already their highest historical point. So that was jarring. And now it happened at the federal level where, as David said, we are all but written off the Liberals early last year. If we look in December, late last year, and then early January, it looked like the Liberals had absolutely no chance of winning. And all of a sudden, they were in the lead and came really close to winning a majority.
So that brings us to where things stand right now, because if there was a ton of movement from a year ago to the election, David, after the election until now, there has not been a commensurate amount of movement. What is your assessment of where things stand, primarily between, of course, the Liberals and the Conservatives?
Yeah, look, I look at the depends the question. But first, if you ask people how they would vote, they're telling us they would vote largely like they did in the spring. The vast majority, 90+% of Liberals would vote Liberal again, and 90% plus of Conservatives would vote Conservative again. So it's still a very competitive political environment around the question of vote intention. It's different when you ask about the leaders. It's different when you ask about which party you think is best able to handle the issues you care most about. But on the core horse race ballot question, I still think this is a very competitive environment, like it had been in the lead up to that election.
And Sebastian, what are you seeing in the sort of horse race numbers right now?
Seeing the same thing. So the Liberals are ahead, but at the same time, we've seen some shifts regionally over time. Some of the underlying indicators have softened a little bit for Mark Carney and the Liberals, but we're not seeing a move towards the Conservative. And what we're seeing is in Quebec, the Bloc is a little bit stronger than they were if we look back at the election. So that could cost the Liberals a few seats here, while they became maybe a little bit stronger elsewhere in Canada. So probably not much change from a voting from the results if we were to have an election today.
The issue set, both when the Conservatives were ahead and then when the Liberals moved ahead, David, was very informative in determining kind of what people were thinking about as they were deciding how to cast their ballot. If you look at the kinds of issues that are top concerns for Canadians right now, what story does it tell you?
Well, it tells us the affordability crisis in people's minds remains front and center. 2 out of 3 told us in a poll we did a few weeks ago that they feel like it's never been as bad as it is now. And when you ask them to rate a bunch of issues and ask them which 3 are most important, close to 2 and 3 say the cost of living is one of those 3. The economy, healthcare, and housing. What we've seen is concerns around Trump and the U.S.-Canada relationship is still important, and important to some voters far more than others. But it's moved down that list, and so. I think that's part of what's creating that competitive environment. Is there's a number of issues that the Conservatives typically do well on, and they are doing well on, that are more salient to voters today or Canadians today than others, which the Liberals typically have done better in the last year on.
Sebastian, when we look at the question of leadership, that's another interesting public opinion story, right? Because while the horse race is very even, when you ask the question of, your approval or lack thereof of the people leading those parties, there's a big discrepancy in either direction for each of the parties. And in particular, that has, in recent weeks, drawn a lot of focus and scrutiny to the leadership of the Conservative Party. What are you seeing there? Because
of the key issues that we see have been dominating, voters' minds for now. Well, we could even say over 2 years. It's nothing new that affordability is so important. But of course, the arrival of Donald Trump, the threats to Canada, the tariffs, the economic uncertainty, all these things play into the hands of Mark Carney, which explains the rise of the Liberal Party and of Mark Carney as a leader. And what we're seeing is it's tough for Pierre Poilievre to really score a lot of points on anything that relates to the economy. The core strength of Pierre Poilievre when he was chosen as a leader is that he was so different from Justin Trudeau. And he presented himself very well to a lot of voters when he was focusing on affordability itself and pinning the problems on Justin Trudeau, but also focusing on other, what we can call culture war issues or cultural issues, also about the environment. And Mark Carney made a lot of this disappear. So a lot of the wedges that really gave Pierre Poilievre an edge are gone. And it's difficult when you've been in the public spotlight for so many years to completely reinvent yourself as an economic mastermind. And the trick for the Conservatives will be to try to separate affordability from other economic concerns. Because as long as it remains wrapped in a general discussion about the economy and about tariffs and how to manage the relationship with the U.S., it's going to be harder for Pierre Poilievre. If they bring this back to affordability, that's where they have a stronger, a better chance of succeeding.
What does the party's chances look like without Poilievre? You've done some interesting analysis there, David.
Look, it's hard to predict that because so many of the people who might replace him are not well known. And so it's very hypothetical. But when you do test some of the names that people have said could replace him, none of them are as well liked within the party, which I think is the first important part of the dilemma facing the Conservatives. But some of them are more appealing to those outside of the party, right? And so it's a hard one to answer. I actually don't know if anyone could do as well as Pierre Poilievre in this environment. And there's two reasons. One is Mark Carney remains quite popular. And so whoever would go up against him still has to find a way to make the case that he is not the right person for this moment for the people who think he is. But the second factor is that Conservative coalition that Poilievre has built, part of it is there because of him, and a part of it would probably reject a more moderate Jean Charest, Aaron O'Toole type person in this environment. And so I think it's like a really hard place for the Conservatives because Pierre Poilievre at once is deeply popular among most of those who would vote Conservative, but anything but with the rest of the country.
Sebastian, I just have a few seconds left, but I got to get your take on Quebec, if you don't mind. You had new numbers out December 3rd. They were already not pretty for the Liberals. What is your read on what's going on?
Well, I think what we see in many ways, politics can be cruel because what we're seeing in everything that transpired is that Pablo Rodriguez himself doesn't seem to be involved in any of what in Quebec, a new term that really became popular is fling flang. That's something we hear everywhere now. But the fact that all the ethical issues seem to be connected to his leadership campaign, whether he was involved or not, and the history of the Liberal Party in Quebec with some, while over the years we've heard a lot of allegations, not many proofs, but there's a trail that has been following the Liberals for a long time in the province. And unfortunately, Pablo Rodriguez got caught into this, and I don't think there was much of a choice for him to go at this stage. So we'll see what happens because in next year, we know it's going to be an election about the referendum. And this is an area where the Liberals can really present themselves as the alternative again, with the CAQ struggling and it is now difficult for the Premier in the polls. So everything is up in the air in Quebec. And as usual, we'll probably have a surprise next year. In Quebec, that's the way politics goes.
It does. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, both of you, for the conversation, for your insights tonight. Appreciate it, and the best of the holiday season to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you and your viewers.
Sebastian Dallaire and David Coletto coming up on Power Play. Our takeaway. Stay right there. Welcome back to Power Play, and our takeaway tonight is actually looking ahead to later this evening, where it is anticipated that U.S. President Donald Trump is set to, quote-unquote, address the nation, the United States, at about 9 o'clock Eastern. That's when things get underway. We will have full coverage right here at CTV News Channel. The president's, or the White House, I should say, more largely, has been uncharacteristically tight-lipped about what the president will talk about. But, of course, we are all ears given the current trade war the U.S. has launched on this country. We'll have full coverage, as I mentioned, tonight, starting at 9 o'clock Eastern. I will leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.